1985 fantasy film Return to Oz, directed by Walter Murch, starring Nicole Williamson, Jean Marsh, Piper Laurie, and Fairuza Balk. Let's take a quick look. Welcome back to the Cult of Films. I am so excited tonight because we are talking about one of my personal favorite childhood films that really jacked a lot of people up back in the day. It didn't have that effect on me. It was one of the first times that I was this in awe over a childhood film back then, and that is 1985's Return to Oz, which was quite a different film from what I think the studios, and you know, this is coming from Disney, expected it to be, but more on that later. I couldn't do this alone. I had to bring on an absolute expert, and I am so happy to introduce my guest today, and that is actress, seamstress, Zoe O Haillin. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Well, thank you for having me on. You know, it's Return to Oz. I love talking about it, so I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we actually met through a mutual friend, and that is one of my favorite people in the world, and that's filmmaker Tony Walters from Rad Entertainment. He's directed some great films, one of which that you have actually been a part of in Kill Dolly Deadly. But yeah, we kind of met through him. And what was it about Wizard of Oz and just the whole Oz realm really spoke to you, and like you, because you're really into it?
You know, it's really hard to say. I was first introduced to it when I was 2 is where I had like solid memories of Oz being in my life, but I'm sure it was sooner than that. My grandmother was a huge fan of the books, so she read me the books as a kid, and my mom was a huge fan of the film, as I think almost every person who grew up in America, especially in the 60s, would be. So I was introduced to the books and the movie at a young age, and I think I just love that it was such a deep lore, such a well-rounded, I mean, if you have only seen the MGM film, you only have the slightest sliver of an idea of what the stories are about, but I was just taken in by, there was this whole world with a lore, the magic had a rhyme to it, a rhyme and reason to it, and there were so many fascinating characters and adventures that I think I was just drawn in, and I just kept finding more and more to love, and as I got older, I just kind of really let it come into my life and actually kind of guide my career in many ways.
That is awesome, because I mean, you've done some great costume and makeup work with it. Go check out her social media page. You completely transform into these characters. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I like to say that anyone who looks at the costumes can tell that I'm a woman who's seen this movie any of these Oz movies a million times. So I'm glad it shows.
I mean, just the fact that you have that movie poster in the background is saying a lot, because even trying to pull an image for the thumbnail for this very video that you all are hopefully enjoying right now was kind of a hard thing to do, getting an HD image. So, I mean, it looks like you really, have taken on this IP and as this beloved thing in your life.
Yeah, and Return to Oz especially, I have this very special spot in my heart and in my Oz collection. For Return to Oz, it is some of the rarer Oz items that you can find, because in America they didn't make a lot, and so a lot of the merchandise for this film is foreign. So I kind of like to say that I protect it. I take in the unwanted Oz and give it a good
Absolutely. But talk about unwanted, this has definitely been one of the like the cult of films. I mostly talk about films with big followings that didn't make a ton of money. This is a Disney film, but definitely they almost wanted people to forget this. This was almost on the level of like a Black Cauldron or something, where it came out and it really, like, even Siskel and Ebert just ripped this thing apart. It was critically panned because at the time it was just way, in my opinion, it was way ahead of its time. You know, this is getting a little ahead of myself. I like to talk about the director a little bit, and this Walter Murch, this is his one and only directorial piece. But Walter Murch, I mean, everyone knows him as, I think he is one of the most prolific editors. He edited things like The Godfather, you know, 1, 2, and 3, American Graffiti, The English Patient. So, I mean, this is no slouch as far as a name goes in the industry, but as far as just directing goes, this was his baby.
Oh, yeah. I think it was him who really pitched the film to Disney, saying, hey, let's do an Oz film. And took a lot of gambles with it, but it, like you said, it was in a kind of dark age for Disney. It was when they were going through a lot of changes, so it's kind of in that somewhere between Black Hole and Little Mermaid. So, you know, Black Hole was the beginning of their slide into nothingness, which did have Black Cauldron and Watcher in the Woods, and these really, he was doing some really dark films in this time period, and then kind of recanted on it later when they went back to animated and, you know, Oliver and Company and then Little Mermaid, and they went back into the renaissance of animation. But it definitely was ahead of its time. It was the dark children's fantasy before Tim Burton came in and said, hey, let's redo Alice in Wonderland and all those.
Poorly, yeah.
At least Return to Oz was objectively a well put together film.
It's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, this film literally has everything, the practical effects, the costuming, the claymation, although, you know, looking at it now in 2019, after you see stuff like Avengers Endgame, you're like, oh, these are, like, my kids are like, oh, this is kind of dated effects. And I'm very proud of my children for making that assumption rather than just being like, I'm bored, I just want to watch. They're just like, oh, the effects look bad. I'm like, I'm a proud father. But you know, box office, this thing, the budget was $28 million for a Disney film. That's kind of peanuts in today's realm. But it only made $11 million. Like, no one, the people that did show up to watch this, and I think a lot of the critics made people kind of shy away because this was he definitely had a vision. This was an adaptation of two novels, right? This was an amalgamation of the two.
Yes, I have them right here. First edition copies of The Marvelous Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz, which are the two books it's based on. So Marvelous Land is from 1904 and Ozma of Oz is from 1906.
God, that is freaking incredible.
I was like, I have my visual aids ready. I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the first editions out of the cabinet. So there's, you know, it's a rare treat. But it's funny that it was so panned and kind of universally hated. Well, I don't want to say it was hated, but it was misunderstood.
Sure.
I think one of the things that doomed it, now I know MGM diehards will kill me for saying this, but America has almost become unhealthily and critically attached to the MGM film to the point where they can't recognize that in itself was an adaptation. So people expected Return to Oz to be that saccharine, sweet, rainbow-colored Judy Garland Oz, but really that even wasn't what the novels were. So I would say that in spirit, Return to Oz is much closer to the novels than Wizard of Oz was, and the audience wasn't really ready for that. And I think I think one misstep that I think Walter Murch took, or maybe it was more of Disney, it might have been Disney's behest, was trying to make this film appear as a sequel to the MGM film. Because if you try and attach yourself to the MGM film anyway, if you're not copying it to the letter, you're gonna get annihilated by the fans.
Sure.
But like the addition of the ruby slippers and actually advertising it, saying that picks up where the classic left off, they doomed themselves because they were saying, hey, this is the MGM film, and then audiences came and they're like, oh, hell no, it's not.
Yeah.
But everybody I know who's a diehard book fan, who loves the Oz books, loved it. I know a lot of my friends who were around in the 80s said that they went and saw it multiple times in theaters. So, I mean, so I think it had a big repeat audience.
Well, yeah, and let's go back to, you know, like you said, the source material itself was quite dark because the MGM version, the 1939 Julie Garland classic, is just that. I mean, it is a fabulous movie. It is a work of art in its own right. But that was not a very faithful, shall we say, adaptation to the story. The actual story of even The Wizard of Oz was quite frightening as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't realize what's been cut from the book, which I think part of it was cut for time. I mean, to make Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the novel, into a film that leaves everything in, you would have another Lord of the Rings. You'd have a three-hour epic. And in 1939, people weren't they were hardly sitting for an hour and a half. They weren't going to sit for 2-3 hours. So, I mean, in the books, there's a sequence where the Scarecrow snaps the neck of 100 crows. The Tin Woodman beheads 100 wolves. There is a lot of death and destruction in the original book that MGM was like, you know what, we'll push that to the side. We're going to focus on the rainbows and the happy and the songs.
Yeah. Well, and even in, like, alluding to that in Return to Oz, where Dorothy starts talking about the Tin Woodsman and how he's kind of disassembling himself piece by piece, was just like, like retch-inducing to audiences back in 1985. So the fact that, they left those things out, because like I said, I think that this film, by today's standards, is quite tame. Because of the whole Renaissance, after Nightmare Before Christmas and then you start getting Coraline and Kubo and all these things where it was more acceptable to have not just the, like you stated, like the saccharine, super sweet, everyone's happy, the Munchkins, what have you. I think if this film came out today, it would have been probably extremely well received.
Oh yeah, I think it still could have run into the issues from MGM fans not liking it. I think it still would have run that risk, because we've seen that again with Oz the Great and Powerful, Emerald City, these more recent retellings that they get their own acclaim. Like, I mean, Oz the Great and Powerful was the #1 movie in America for a few weeks when it came out, and it was a somewhat darker Oz. But even then, it still had people shying away from it because it wasn't like the MGM film. But I mean, I remember when I was in middle school in the mid-2000s, showing all my friends Return to Oz, being like, no, I know you guys don't get my obsession with Wizard of Oz, but we're going to watch Return to Oz. And, these 13, 14, 15-year-olds are like, hell yeah, this is a good movie. I like that more than the other one. So I think it definitely could have found more foothold in today's world.
Yeah, absolutely. And just talk about, like, the cast. Like, I ran through the headliners or the marquee, but I mean, you had people, and think back to this, in 1985, what other huge movie, live action movie that wasn't well received, that I did a show about on this very channel, was Labyrinth. Labyrinth came out in 1985, another film that was a little bit ahead of its time, although I think it was a little bit more palatable for the general audience, probably because it didn't have the stigma of being an Oz property. But it also had Brian Henson. He voiced Jack Pumpkinhead, and he was Hoggles. What a great year for Brian Henson.
Yeah, and well, what a lot of people don't know, because I don't think they played it up too much in the credits to Return to Oz, but the Henson Company made the puppets.
Right.
For Return to Oz. So, but yeah, Brian Henson, that was I think the world was still kind of reeling from, I think they had just recently lost Jim when this film was made, but to kind of see his legacy live on in the puppetry and then Brian taking on a role, it had some people that, it had some good headliners, especially because a lot of this film was made out of England.
Right.
Some of these names were huge in England. Like Nicole Williamson was a huge name in England, and Piper Laurie, just a few years ago had been Margaret White in Carrie, and so, she kind of went from project to project. And
Piper Laurie, if I'm not mistaken, was the mom from Exorcist, right?
No, Carrie. She was.
Right, yeah.
I think it was Ellen Burstyn in Exorcist.
That's right, yeah.
But yeah, no, she, a lot of people, like, I remember watching this movie with my mom, and she's like, I know Aunt Em from somewhere. What has Aunt Em been in? I'm like, oh, she was Carrie's mom, the one that locked her in a closet and then was stabbed to the wall and crucified with knives.
Yeah. She's had a little bit of a, a turn, because now she's just sending her niece to go get electric shock therapy. It's a lot better, ladies and gentlemen.
I mean, in Antem's defense, she honestly thought she was doing the best thing. It was a new form of medicine then.
Was it Requiem for a Dream level where, electric shock was happening, which was Ellen Bernstein. See how we did that? We just connected a full circle.
Yeah.
Let's run through the movie a little bit. For whoever hasn't seen it, I'll say spoiler alerts, even though this movie's been out longer than most of the viewers have been alive. But we just like to put that on top. This was Faruqa Balk's first film, and wow, did she not only had to star in a movie, but she had to be Dorothy, and I think that she is one of the strongest points of the film.
Oh yeah, definitely. Fairuza's portrayal is, again, I'm gonna get shot, I'm gonna get murdered. I think she captured the spirit of L. Frank Baum's Dorothy better than even Judy did. But I mean, in Judy's defense, Judy was a 16-year-old that was cast as a 12-year-old, which was right. She was doing the best she could. Give her a break. But
again, iconic role. We're not saying anything.
Yeah, but Fairuza Balk at 9 years old to take on one of the most iconic fairy tale roles and to just slay it the way she did. She was phenomenal. She was funny. She was smart. She was brave. She just did such a good job capturing all those elements of Dorothy that are in the book that you didn't really get to see in the MGM version.
Yeah, absolutely. So this does, story-wise, it picks up from where, I think it was, 6 months after the events of Wizard of Oz leaves off. Dorothy's having dreams of Oz, and they're trying to help her, and the best way is to, because she's distracted from her day-to-day chores on the farm. She even befriends this particular hen that's kind of on the chopping block, too, because she's not laying any eggs. But, they find a key that has the Oz logo on it. They take her to this kind of cutting edge for the oh my god, you have the key.
Yes, I have the key.
You are the perfect guest for this. They take her, as we said, not maliciously, they take her to go get evaluated mentally, so she could have unmolested thoughts to do her everyday chores on this farm, to rebuild the house and all these things, whatever. It's 19 nothing time-wise.
1909, so it's not quite 1900 yet.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Yeah, exactly. So, we get introduced to the Doctor. He is played by Nicole Williamson.
I believe he was Merlin in Excalibur.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. And he plays a dual role. This whole film, it has a theme of duality. So a lot of these actors have these dual roles, especially in the villain roles. But then, up until this point, I think everyone's still kind of on board as far as general audiences go. And that's when one of the most disturbing things happen is, they introduce the electric shock system that has a weird, creepy face. And then we're just straight up, tying little children down to go get their brains sucked out.
Well, and the crazy thing is that plot point is 100% Disney. I don't know why Disney thought that was a good idea. In Ozma of Oz, which is the next book that Dorothy appears in, she gets stuck in a storm like she does in Return to Oz, but she's on a boat. Her and Uncle Henry are on vacation, and she gets knocked overboard, which I think is a lot less terrifying than, Antem abandoned her to be strapped down and shocked in the head.
It's only for one night, but...
Yeah, but I'm we couldn't have just had them go on vacation. We couldn't have kept that plot point.
Right. This is where she gets shut in the room. We're introduced to the nurse, Nurse Wilson, played by Jean Marsh, who just is so menacing in this. It's right before it happens. Right before they kind of give her the shock to help her with the dreams, that's when the power goes out, and that's where we start getting flashes of what later we find out is Ozma.
Such a good character, such an underappreciated character too.
Yeah, and this is where I know a lot of debate. Researching this movie, digging deep. There's a whole camp of people that think that everything after this was in her head, that the electric shock did go through and she started seeing visions of Ozma and all that. So I don't know, where do you fall on that line?
I'm always team Oz is real. Like that's where I go, because in the novels it is real. So I'm a purist, so I do slide onto it that way. Because with Return to Oz, I don't want to jump too far ahead in the ending, but like if this was like all a dream and she wakes up, I'm like, that's kind of morbid when you're like, where did the other girl go?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've also heard, apparently there had at one point in production been talk of actually Ozma being a dual role with Dorothy.
Oh, okay.
It was supposed to be that because everybody had a counterpart in Oz, they were to find out that, oh, Dorothy's counterpart is Ozma and Dorothy's counterpart is the Queen of Oz. But
right.
It's actually interesting what they did with the characters here, because they did kind of merge. In many ways, Dorothy takes on the role that Ozma had played in Marvelous Land of Oz.
Because she has a huge role in the book, where in this it's kind of muted.
Yeah, and I think Disney was kind of shying away from something that they could have tackled, but it would have been, even today, it would have been a controversial thing. But like Marvelous Land of Oz, published in 1904, had a transgender subplot. So Ozma actually starts in the books as a boy, and is then found out to be the Queen of Oz and is transformed into a girl. So it's like, come on, Disney, you could have had the whole trans storyline in 1985, but, you know.
Yeah.
1985.
Dropping the ball. Yeah. This was, I guess I could introduce my first, well, you know, before that, the Ozma spirit or whatever in Kansas helps Dorothy escape. And this is where it gets kind of real morbid, where have to jump into a rushing river, and a lot of people are just like, yeah, that's where the other little girl is never seen again. The chicken probably dies, you know, never to be seen again.
I'm like, Oz is real, and they're all safe and sound in Oz.
Yeah, it's just better to...
I don't like to think of this, like, 10-year-old girl drowning, like...
Right, yeah. And everyone gives Nurse Wilson credit there, because they're like, you know, and I will say that too, because the doctor isn't inherently bad. I think he's just really excited about the new tech of the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will... Nurse Wilson, I'm always kind of, like, torn. I'm like, is she really a good person? Is she jumping in the river because she actually is worried about these kids? Or is it more of a, shit, this is a liability. We're going to get in trouble for this.
It's going to be a PR nightmare. Yeah.
Let's not forget, Ozma or whatever her Kansas version straight up tells Dorothy, oh, they've damaged their patients and locked them in the cellar. That's who you hear screaming all in the night. And it's like, oh, God.
Welcome to your children's movie.
Yeah. Again, we couldn't have a vacation subplot.
Right.
They were going to Australia. We could have kept that. Nope. Disney's like, shock therapy. It's cheaper than a boat.
Right. Yeah. Hey, Mr. Murch, he had a vision. But this is so the one major gripe about the movie. This is kind of, I think Bellina just really irritated me. As a child, she was funny. It's like, oh, the chicken's making jokes, ha ha ha. But like watching it now as like a grizzled old, you know, mid-30s something, it just like, she just ruined scenes for me.
You know, I like her. I think she is grating. I will say that sometimes it's like, okay, we could have given her a less obnoxious voice, but to me, it's really funny, and she has such a distinct voice. It's funny because whenever I watch Labyrinth, she's also the voice of the garbage lady, and I'm like, there's Bellina, but. The puns are a little crazy, but they got those, honestly. Those come right from Baum, right out of the books.
Okay, well, at least it's faithful. Yeah, because, I mean, it's, like, so on the nose. Like, Dorothy's just like, oh, you know, don't step on the sand, because this is the desert of...
The Deadly Desert, yeah.
The Deadly Desert, and you'll just turn to sand, and she's like, oh, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Or, you know, just like...
Yeah, like, those kind of jokes, you know. No, they all lost their heads, Bellina. Well, that's what I call just plain carelessness.
And that's a direct quote. Dorothy finds out that all her friends are kind of spread out, or, you know, she's looking for them. She finds her old house, and that's when she kind of first realizes that something really is up, that because she looks at the yellow brick road, and that's just completely just tore to shit. Is that something that happens in the novels as well?
No, it's kind of like, it's, I would say, darkest timeline Oz. there is the Gnome King threatens to do it several times throughout the series, but it never actually happens. So they kind of are like, you know what, we're just going to say that he succeeded. And it's not accurate to the books, but it is, I will say it is a great piece of storytelling. Like, just the look on Dorothy's face when she picks up that brick, and the look of, holy crap, what has happened since I've been gone? Like, it's a great image. So yeah. I enjoyed that.
I mean, and just the set pieces alone, like, everything is so tactile in this film. This is way before CG, so all of the other effects are claymation. That's kind of, you know, in this area is where we first get, like, the messenger rock guy talking to the Gnome King, and just the amount of expression that they were able to pull from that in 1985 was stellar.
Oh yeah, I remember watching it the first time too, and just being really freaked out that Dorothy stepped on a rock and it had an eye that opened. And I'm like, what is that? Which I saw this movie for the first time, like, I think I was 2 or 3, and honestly, I remember it kind of scaring me, and then thinking it was a fever dream for about 9 years before it came out on video.
It does feel very fever dreamish.
Yeah.
Reminds me of I don't know if you're a Bob's Burgers fan, but there's an episode where Louise gets a really bad flu, and she has this kind of like Return to Oz type dream, and it's very, very on the. It does feel very fever dreamish. That's very funny. But yeah, you know, the Emerald City's torn to shit. All of her friends are turned to stone, and but this is when she starts making new ones, and this is where I wish the movie did do better, because just think of the toys we would have got. I would have loved a TikTok toy or a Jack Pumpkinhead toy back in the day.
They exist. You just got to buy them from Japan and be prepared to drop about $1,000 a piece on them.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. If you actually, what's really neat, I'm gonna do a plug for some random person I don't know. Someone on eBay is actually selling 3D printed action figures.
Oh, awesome.
As characters. I haven't bought them, so I can't speak to the quality, but they're out there. They were big in Japan and Germany back in the 80s, but yeah, like I said, to get them stateside, you're going to be shelling out some cash.
Absolutely. The TikTok better have a bunch of little dials on it to, you know, like a little Teddy Ruxpin.
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
I want a Teddy Ruxpin version of TikTok that reads stories to me, but only in his, like, monotone, like, clockwork speech.
Right, and he has to stop in the middle of the story, right? To wind down.
Run down.
The actor that played TikTok had to literally fold himself in half and waddle down the street.
Yeah, and mind you, it was backwards. He was a contortionist, so he was actually in a full back bend, watching through a camera screen, and then manipulating the legs with his arms.
That's what I'm saying. Like, this was a film that definitely took an amount of love to create. This was not just like a haphazard. This wasn't Angry Birds 2. You know, This was someone that really cared about a correct adaptation and really doing it justice and really doing it right, even more so than the original film for it. But this was around the time where we get introduced to probably what terrified most children back in the 80s, and that is the Wheelers.
Nightmare fuel for days. I don't think I've ever met anyone who's like, I want to hug a Wheeler. I think they're cute. Like flying monkeys, there are even some people like, oh, the flying monkeys are cute. But no, the Wheeler, if you thought the monkey scared you as a kid, like, take a Xanax before the Wheelers. You're not going to do well.
Even their introduction has, like, it's almost like it looks like an episode or like a scene from the Warriors, right? It's just like someone spray painted, you know, beware the Wheelers in red, so it could be like even misconstrued as blood. They're one of the most unpractical villains, I will say. Like, I don't know how scary, you know, an elongated person with all their, I guess weapon limbs taken over by wheels. Just push them over when they come at you, but maybe the wheels are sharp. I don't know.
Well, because they even threatened to throw Dorothy in the deadly desert, and it's like, with what hands? How are you going to lift her? Or like 3 or 4, are you going to like bite her clothes and drag her by her collar? Like,
which is somewhat terrifying of a thought, right? Like, ew.
Yeah, but I'm also like, I don't know who the hell they think they're messing with. She's killed both Wicked Witches. Do you really want to fuck with this girl?
Yeah. And it really just takes TikTok's action move, the round, whirly, dryer spin, to kind of take out the whole group. So, wheelers, yes, they're scary, but
Jackie Chan has nothing on TikTok. TikTok could have been an action star in and of himself.
Right. That's true. And then we get introduced to what I think was the closest thing to nightmare fuel for me as a child, and that's Princess Mombi. She is this, we get introduced to her as just this beautiful princess, and she looks very, soft-spoken and whatnot, and then takes Dorothy into a room, and then you get to meet her friends.
31 heads all in a row. Like that imagery of just them walking down the hall and like Mombi's just all graceful strolling down the hallway, and Dorothy is just looking around like, what have I gotten myself into this time? Just all these eyes following them. Oh, it's great. It's horrifying, but it's such a great scene, and you actually feel just as uncomfortable as Dorothy.
And that's a true portion adaptation, right?
Yes. So she is a merging of two characters. So the name Mombi comes from the villain from Marvelous Land, who is more of your traditional old hag type witch, was the keeper of Ozma. That's about as much as they took from Mombi, and then everything else was taken from the villain Princess Langwidere from Ozma of Oz.
And she's kind of a collector of heads.
Yeah. So I think they probably decided, like, oh, we really like Langwidere. We like that she keeps, all these heads. They're like, that's really creepy. But we want her to have all the magic powers of Mombi, so we'll merge her. And they're like probably thinking, Mombi's going to be so much easier for people to say and spell. Who knows how to say or spell Langwidere?
That's very true. Yeah, and then again we get introduced to Jack Pumpkinhead, which is just such a cool design, and I can't help it. I can't help but look at Jack Pumpkinhead and think of Jack Skellington. So maybe Tim Burton took some. Creative, intellectual, borrowed some of that from his design.
Oh yeah, Tim Burton has gone on record to say he's a huge fan of the Oz books, and has even said Jack Skellington and Sally were based on Jack Pumpkinhead and Scraps the Patchwork Girl, which Scraps only has a minor cameo in the finale, but the whole Patchwork Ragdoll is actually a character from the Oz books. So he borrowed very heavily to create Sally.
Oh, nice. And he is just such an iconic voice. Again, we stated Brian Henson, who's just one of my favorite, voice, puppeteers, just knocks it out of the park in this role. And it's so cool because a lot of the time when, Jack is constantly in, a state of, falling apart. So those scenes when he's full on, like a puppet, are great. And then whoever is in the suit has to be... Probably it's almost like a Javier Botet, although I know it's not him because Javier Botet's probably younger than I am, doing all these kind of body horror roles nowadays. But it had to have been something like some tall gentleman, and he just moved. He had this very particular way of movement when you saw him as a human, an obvious human in there.
Yeah, I always think I'm like, if this was made today, Doug Jones would probably. Yeah. It just, that very spindly, the way he moves and his little intricate finger movements. And it is funny because he could be such a creepy character, but because of the way Brian voiced him, he's actually really endearing. Who wouldn't want a pumpkin head following them around, calling them mom or dad? I wanted that as a kid. I'm like, okay, if I really believe this jack-o'-lantern's going to come to life and call me mom. Never happened, but here we are.
Yep, and then we get the Gump. They put together a bunch of furniture and put a moose head on the front. I love that the wings are just these leaves, and aviate them out the window as it does. But it's just great because the Gump is just kind of the Eeyore of the group. He's just kind of yeah, thanks for noticing me. I'm just here, but I'm not put together very well.
I think his best line in the movie, though, is just when he says, I should have quit when I was ahead. L. Frank Baum puns straight out of the books. They're just, picking the best lines.
Yeah. And he's great. Talking about doing puns right, I think he does well where Bellina's just, dad joke or chicken dad jokes 101. It's
yeah, true.
His are great. but yeah, you know, stuff happens. They escape Mombi's wrath. They make it to, you know, the Nome King. They all find out during the journey that this new villain has taken over, called the Nome King, turned everyone to stone. And we find out when we get to Nome King Mountain, after they fall, you know, hundreds and thousands of feet, very softly.
Well, I mean, they landed on the gump. He was a sofa.
I'm glad I was there for you, you know. That's one of my favorite scenes, is the initial introduction or kind of back and forth between Dorothy and the Nome King.
I remember as a kid really feeling cheated. Like, he's so underhanded. He'll do like he's like, look at me, be nice, and then he like snaps it away. Like when he's like, hey, come down here, and drops her into the mountain. And she runs face to face with Scarecrow, and there's this like moment where she's so excited. She's like, Scarecrow, I found you, and then snap, lightning bolt, Scarecrow's gone. I'm like, what a dick.
Yeah, because I mean, I think Walter Murch was really playing with house money, where he, you know, even on the poster, it shows Cowardly Lion, it shows the Tin Man, it shows Scarecrow, and you know, for people especially from the MGM property, we're expecting these beloved characters. So when you now have a grouping of furniture thrown together poorly, you know, a Jack Pumpkinhead that's constantly falling apart, a big, you know, ball of metal that's like falling asleep, all, you know, taking an old man nap all the time. That was quite ballsy. Whether it was, you know, faithful to the novels or not, they really, you know, and maybe that's why this wasn't as well received off the bat, because it was kind of sold as something that it wasn't. And I think that was a little bit of Walter Murch's fault, like I think you said before, where the ruby slippers were never part of it. They were always like silver or whatnot, but they had to pay MGM money to be able to use that to kind of connect it to the original movie.
And well, it's funny that you mentioned them having new characters. I think if you look at who the characters are, it's kind of like they were trying to be like, these are the same characters 2.0, because you look, Jack Pumpkinhead, he's kind of a scarecrow. TikTok, very similar to the Tin Man, and then you got the Gump, who is a grumpy, cantankerous animal that says silly stuff. So, you know, he was kind of like, they're all kind of like equivalents of each other. But it is a shame that we don't see more of the original three, especially because all of Tin Man and Lion's dialogue ends up on the cutting room floor. They had lines. They had more time, and then it gets cut, and even Scarecrow, he gets a fraction of the time that he was budgeted in the original screenplay. But I will say what little bit we get to see of Justin Case as the Scarecrow is phenomenal.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I wish I would have seen Deep Roy voicing the Tin Man.
You get like that brief moment of just a subtle "aww," like that's all. I'm like, really?
Right.
He's like Dorothy's second oldest friend, and like he gets "aww" as his only dialogue. But I just imagine him inside the Tin Man costume in his full Oompa Loompa, though. That's the terrifying thing. I'm like, there's an Oompa Loompa in that Tin Man, and I'm not okay with it.
I loved the Nome King's betrayal. Well, the betrayal by Nicole Williamson doing this, because you have that, again, duality of the Doctor being now the main foil of Oz. And like you said, he plays that like you're so... like he's just like this almost like Santa Claus-esque like welcoming host, where he's like giving them drinks and giving them like pastries, even though it's like sulfur.
It's not silver and limestone pie. He's trying to kill them off the bat. And I think it's funny that you mentioned Santa Claus, because in the novel, that is exactly how he's described. He's described as a Santa Claus type character. But in the books, he's short and chubby and has a big white beard. So they did. It's funny that you still got Santa Claus from that, though. Like, oh, Frank Baum, you got your point across. Like,
he really did. It's just like he's so like inviting, and he's like this great host. And I love the effect that when he's putting them all through the trials. First off, I love how the Gump couldn't give a shit either way. He's like, put me in, I don't care. I'll be an ornament or not. It doesn't matter. But I just love that detail of, you know, every time the lightning goes off, it just goes close up on Nicole Williamson's face, and he just has this like look of elation, but like he's also like cat eating the canary, where he knows the whole narrative and they don't, and it's just he plays it so well without saying much.
Well, and he's like stealing their souls, because if you watch, every time those flashes happen, he becomes more human.
Yes.
He goes from being like just a face in a rock to a rock-like person, and then he's got a human face, and and then you find out the whole time he's been wearing the frickin' ruby slippers. It's like, what is going on in your life? Are you gonna Buffalo Bill Dorothy? Like, what is
kinda
like it's weird.
Put the lotion in the basket. Yeah. Yeah, it just that villain is so dynamic, and I mean that's a little weird where it seemed like they didn't know what to do with Mombi, like they had to kind of tie her into the end, so she's just like rushing to go kind of tell on herself, like, oh, everyone escaped. That never made sense to me, but even he's just like, I don't know why are you here, and he puts her in a cage.
Yeah, they're just kind of like, oh shit, we got this loose end, let's put Mombi in a cage.
Yeah.
After we have her laying face down on the ground, I'm like, oh, this is some kinky BDSM stuff. She's into that shame play, like.
Yeah. With those ruby slippers, man. Yeah. Convenient storytelling at this point, where they're just like, we have to find the correct furniture or ornaments. He just kind of walks around and just like points. It was almost like the scene where in Princess Bride, where he's just kind of like walking around with the sword, with his eyes closed, and then he's saying the prayer to his father, and then he just sticks the sword into the tree, and then it happens to be the one particular notch that he needed to open up and find out where Carrie Ewell's was. But whatever. Storytelling. Dorothy finds the people. Scarecrow, I think, is the first one to be reanimated, and then he's just like, hey, people from Oz are green.
Yeah, Gnome King was not slick. What, you make the king of the Emerald City an emerald? Like, she's not.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they didn't like in the book, Belina falls asleep under the Gnome King's throne and wakes up just in time for him to conveniently be telling someone, oh, they'll never guess that I turned so-and-so into this and so-and-so into that. So in the book, it's actually Belina. Dorothy, everyone has been turned into an ornament, and it's Belina who goes in. Nice. And saves the day. So I guess they were like, no, we got to give Dorothy's got to be the one to figure it out. It can't be the chicken.
But the chicken does get her time to shine.
Yeah, she gets her time to be the hero.
Thinking back to children watching this, the Gnome King's kind of like final form is pretty fucked up. I mean, he's sitting there, he's literally eating the gump, and the gump doesn't care. But then Belina, this is her moment, right? This was the time to get her over the hump and lay that egg. And little did we know, just so happened, that the secret weapon was egg.
Talking about nightmare fuel, though, when he eats that egg, he's like, eggs are poison. You're like, okay, now he's just gonna like fall down, right? No, he melts away into like a rock skeleton and then crumbles. All the while there's fire shooting and there's demon creatures coming out of the walls. It's I can see that's probably a point where a lot of parents were just like, no, we're done. We're done.
We're out.
Grabbing the kids, dragging them out. We'll go home. We'll watch The Wizard of Oz. We'll forget this ever happened.
Yeah, his eye like crystallizes over. It's very terrifying.
It flakes off, starts flaking off pieces, and
so good.
He tried to eat Jack, and he deserves it because Jack is a sweet, innocent cinnamon roll, and
he is literally a pumpkin spice latte. Which is kind of weird because Zach loses. Zach is a new character, apparently. Jack loses his little cap in the Gnome King, but later on it's shown that he has either grown a new one or maybe decapitated another pumpkin head. Jerry the pumpkin head, he just kind of swipes his little hat or his pumpkin yarmulke and takes it on for himself. But yeah, of course it still ends in somewhat a good place, where for some reason Dorothy's given the option to either stay or go, and I don't know, any 9-year-old in their right mind, knowing that she could kind of rule this fantastical land, chooses to go back and work on the farm where you already had electric shock therapy pushed on you. I didn't get that, but it's what happened.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Disney thought this is going to be a smash hit, and we'll get to make more films And they're like, we'll make Emerald City of Oz next, where Dorothy and Aunt Em and Uncle Henry all move to Oz to live together. Like, they even kind of set it up like Aunt Em earlier in the film is talking about the mortgage. And, like, the mortgage is an important plot point in Emerald City, so I really think they plan to make a franchise out of it.
Sure.
And then they just kind of screwed up too. Well, they didn't really screw up. They just made a few missteps, and people didn't get what they were getting.
They were just too ahead of the time. Yeah, and you know, the Nurse Wilson is carted off. She's, I think, what the hospital burns down due to lightning. The only one that dies is the doctor, because he went back and, you know, tried to save his creation. So even though it all ended on, you know, a happy, you know, everyone's cheering for Dorothy, it's still like, yes, but this guy roasted alive in his own, you know, hospital. Yeah. And he wasn't, like I said, it's not like he was a bad guy. It's not like he was just a scientist. He was just doing, you know, trying to be like groundbreaking for the time. And he wound up paying the ultimate price for it. So yeah, that's 1985's Return to Oz. Something that is just, I feel like it's under talked about, even for a cult film. I know a lot of people love this film, but it's just something that I don't think it's talked about enough, of how ahead of a time it was, and how groundbreaking it was, and how it should be celebrated, because this really put in motion a lot of what like young film has become today. Like I mentioned before, with like Monster House, and even like Pixar films, where it's not just all straightforward, happy, and glossy. I think a lot of the industry owes a lot of more credit to Return to Oz.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's funny that in America you almost never hear about it. It is still a huge deal in Japan. Like, if you went to Japan, you could probably find any Japanese film buff and be like, do you like Return to Oz? And they'd probably be like, oh yeah. Like, it was a big deal. But, you know, Japan's always liked the bizarre and the dark, so I'm not surprised at all that was a big deal over there. I was actually very surprised and almost screamed out loud when I realized that Return to Oz got a cameo in Stranger Things Season 3. When they're in the Starcourt Mall, if you look at the marquee,
yes,
it says Return to Oz is playing. And I'm like, holy crap.
That is true.
Like, Back to the Future, Day of the Dead, that makes a lot of sense for them to reference those movies. But, like, okay, someone had to like Return to Oz, because they have Return to Oz on the marquee, and then there was an Oz poster in Susie's room when her and Dustin are singing Neverending Story. I'm like, okay, someone on production is an Oz fan.
Super fan, yeah.
And I need to know who they are so that we can be friends and I can get a cameo role on that show or something.
Absolutely. Not like he's watching, maybe he is, but just thanking Walter Murch for like really taking a chance. I mean, this was not a slouch. I mean, he was just one of the best editors ever. He did, you know, Apocalypse Now, House of Cards he did for a while. Tomorrowland was his last one, so, you know, it's always, the wheel's got to fall off sometime. But just the amount of clout that this man had. Also, the music by David Shire. This had a very distinct soundtrack or a score to it, which was equal parts kind of terrifying in itself. Oh yeah,
I think it's kind of like John Carpenter has said. Yeah. If you don't have a good score, you don't really have a good movie. And I think it's like people have said, you know, if you watch Halloween with the sound off, it's not terrifying. I think if you were to watch Return to Oz, some of those tense scenes wouldn't have seemed so tense. Like, I think when Nurse Williamson's chasing Dorothy and the Ozma character and they tumble into the river, it would not have been so stressful if they didn't have like this like loud like brass wailing in the background and violins going crazy. And that's the crazy thing, is that it's all orchestral. It's not anymore, you know, so many scores are synth and electric, or they're like, you know, a lot of films nowadays, if they want to do tension, they're doing guitars and stuff. But this was all like the London Symphony Orchestra, and they made some really dark tunes, but then they also made some really whimsical ones, like TikTok's theme or the Ragtime March when they're doing the final procession to the coronation in the Emerald City. It's all, I mean, it's a phenomenal score with a lot of range, and that's one of the reasons I love it so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of The Cult of Films Return to Oz. People in the comment section, what did you feel about this film if you were in your 30s, or did you show it to your kids? What did they say about it? Like, where does this movie fall? Because like I said, I know there's a huge cult following for it, but there's also a lot of people that don't really talk about it enough, and I think it really should be kind of put on kind of a higher pedestal than it is. And of course, like I said, and like Zoe said, it's kind of Disney trying to sweep it under the rug around that era, but for the people that go out and seek it out, I mean, Faruqa Balk, just seeing her just nail this role, and just, I mean, she always kind of did, even in stupid things like The Water Boy, she was always a great actress, and she just, like, you get to see, like, the foundation of that, like, which is just, like, a really special thing. But yeah, if you like this and you want to listen to it in podcast form only, you could do so on iTunes, Spotify. We're up there. Leave a rating for that. I want to thank my special guest. Like, what a treat having a real, like like professional on the subject. Like, this is just absolutely amazing, talking to someone that this IP has meant so much. So Zoe O Haillin, thank you so much. And where can everyone find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter is ZoeO1989, or you can find me on Instagram, Oh Hey Zoe, and that is OHAIZOE.
Perfect. Awesome. You could find me right here doing movie talk shows every week on They Said, We Said on YouTube. You could also find me, and please do find me on Twitter at OrzovDunn. I love talking movies. I love talking everything nerd culture, really. Magic the Gathering, all that stuff. So hit me up on there. But until next time, I mean, I'll never have an official sign off for this show. Just go watch more cult films. We're not in Kansas anymore.
Poison. Poison indeed. Poison. Poison to lungs.